The heavy crystal chandelier above the grand ballroom of the Bellevue Country Club shimmered, casting light across 200 of the city's most arrogant corporate elites. My brother-in-law, Richard Sterling, wearing a $5,000 tailored tuxedo and clutching a crystal glass of 30-year-old scotch, tapped his butter knife against his glass to command the entire room's attention. "Everyone, if I could have a moment," Richard boomed, his loud, practiced voice echoing across the marble floor. "Tonight, we celebrate my company's expansion. But before we get to the main toast, I want to take a moment to acknowledge my dear brother-in-law, Arthur." The room erupted into polite, condescending chuckles. My wife, Clara, squeezed my hand tightly under the white linen tablecloth, her knuckles white with tension. Richard smirked, pointing his glass directly at me. "Now, Arthur here is a special kind of man," Richard continued, his voice dripping with theatrical pity. "For 20 long years, while the rest of us were out in the private sector, building empires, taking risks, and making real money, Arthur has been sitting in a dim, windowless cubicle, doing boring, low-level paperwork for the federal government. 20 years as a dull, underpaid civil servant. He still drives a 15-year-old sedan and wears off-the-rack suits." Laughter rippled through the high society crowd. Richard's wife, Cynthia, Clara's older sister, snicker-laughed into her silk napkin, flashing her 3-carat diamond ring. "In fact," Richard added, leaning forward against the podium, "tonight, my defense firm is finalizing a massive $5 billion technology integration contract with the Department of Defense. When that contract is signed tonight, my net worth will triple. Meanwhile, poor Arthur will still be clocking in at 8 a.m., earning his modest little government salary. But hey, let's give it up for Arthur. Someone has to do the basic paper pushing." I sat quietly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't reach for my glass. I didn't even blink, because Richard had no idea that the $5 billion Pentagon contract he had staked his entire life and fortune on was currently sitting on an encrypted tablet inside my briefcase. And he had absolutely no idea that the boring government paper pusher he had spent 20 years mocking was the Chief Senior Executive Director of Strategic Defense Procurement, the single highest civilian authority in the Department of Defense, and the exact man who held his entire company's fate in the palm of his hand. 20 years of silent scorn. To understand how a man can sit in complete composure while his wife's family degrades him in front of 200 people, you have to understand the nature of real, invisible power. My name is Arthur Pendelton. I am 48 years old. To the outside world, and to my ambitious, wealth-obsessed in-laws, I was just a quiet, unassuming man who worked an obscure government desk job at a drab federal facility on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. For 2 decades, whenever family gatherings came around, Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas parties, summer barbecues, I was the constant punchline. Richard Sterling, who built a mid-tier defense supply firm called Sterling Cybertech, made it his personal life mission to highlight the financial gap between us. "So, Arthur," Richard would sneer across the holiday dinner table, cutting into an expensive prime rib, "still pushing pencils for Uncle Sam? What's the government pay grade these days? Enough to buy a decent watch yet? Or are you still shopping in the bargain bins?" Cynthia would join in, comparing her luxury European sports cars to the modest, 10-year-old reliable sedan I drove. "Oh, Richard, don't pick on Arthur. Not everyone can be an executive. Some people just don't have the ambition to aim higher. At least he gets a pension in 30 years, right?" My wife Clara was the only one who truly stood by my side. While her family worshipped status, sports cars, and country club memberships, Clara loved me for my integrity, my calm demeanor, and my unwavering presence. She never complained when we lived in a modest 3-bedroom home. She never demanded designer dresses. What Clara and her family didn't know was that my strict adherence to a quiet, humble lifestyle wasn't because I lacked money or authority. It was because my job required absolute, unyielding security discretion. Under federal protocol, my true title was Director of Senior Executive Service, SES3, for the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. I was not a low-level clerk. I was one of less than 15 civilian directors in the entire nation who possessed Tier 5 high-risk clearance with top-secret/SCI clearance privileges. I was responsible for auditing, evaluating, and authorizing multi-billion-dollar defense infrastructure, nuclear logistics, and military satellite communications across all branches of the United States Armed Forces. My daily work didn't happen in a cubicle. It happened inside hardened underground skiffs, sensitive compartmented information facilities, and high-level briefing rooms with Joint Chiefs of Staff, Senate Armed Services Committees, and four-star generals. Why didn't I brag? Why didn't I show them my badge or flash my security credentials to shut them up? Because in the high-stakes world of national defense, true authority doesn't shout. Hollow men crave public applause. Men of real substance carry their duty in silence. Besides, military non-disclosure laws prohibited me from disclosing the precise nature of my oversight portfolio to civilians, including my own extended family. So for 20 years, I swallowed their insults. I smiled politely at their arrogant jokes. I let them believe I was weak, underpaid, and irrelevant. Until Richard's blind greed drove him straight off a financial cliff. The $5 billion bet, 18 months ago, Richard's firm, Sterling Cybertech, put in a bid for the Pentagon's newest operational overhaul contract, Project Aegis Vanguard. It was a massive $5.2 billion contract designed to replace aging communications software across global military supply chains. For a mid-sized company like Richard's, winning this contract was the ultimate jackpot. It meant billions in government payouts, international prestige, and instant entry into the upper echelons of global defense giants. Driven by arrogance, Richard went all in. He took out massive private loans, mortgaged his company's assets to the hilt, hired expensive lobbyists in Washington, and bought a multi-million-dollar estate in anticipation of the payout. He was so certain he had the contract in the bag that he didn't bother ensuring his software actually met rigorous military security standards. Instead, he cut corners, outsourced critical coding to unvetted overseas contractors to save money, and relied on political handshakes to push his application through. 6 months ago, the Department of Defense launched a classified audit into all 3 finalists for Project Aegis Vanguard. And who was appointed as the sole chief reviewing authority for the contract? Me. When Richard's file crossed my secure terminal at the Pentagon, I examined it with absolute cold objectivity. I didn't feel personal malice, nor did I feel family loyalty. National security does not care about family ties. What my engineering team found inside Sterling Cybertech's proposal was alarming. Critical software vulnerabilities that foreign adversaries could exploit within seconds. Inflated cost reports designed to siphon millions in excess taxpayer money. Severe non-compliance with military hardware integration protocols. 3 days before the Bellevue Country Club Gala, I officially signed Directive 88 Alpha, permanently disqualifying Sterling Cybertech from the bidding process and launching a formal federal audit into their financial practices for contract fraud. Richard, however, didn't know this yet. His political lobbyists had fed him false rumors that his contract was guaranteed, and he was eager to throw a massive victory party at the country club to rub his success in everyone's face. Which brings us back to the grand ballroom at Bellevue. The arrival of the convoy, and the reckoning after Richard finished his humiliating speech mocking my 20-year government job. The crowd raised their glasses and drank. Richard stepped down from the podium, strutting over to our table with a smug, victorious grin. Cynthia followed closely behind, clutching her designer wine glass. "No hard feelings, Arthur," Richard said, patting my shoulder condescendingly. "I just wanted to remind everyone that some people are born to lead empires, and others are born to serve them. There's no shame in being an average Joe." "I've never been ashamed of my service, Richard," I said smoothly, taking a sip of water. "Of course you haven't," Cynthia laughed loudly. "Because you don't know what real success feels like. Tonight, Richard is expecting a personal call from the Department of Defense to confirm the award. When that happens, we're flying to Paris on a private jet." Suddenly, the heavy glass double doors at the entrance of the ballroom burst open. The room went dead silent. 4 towering United States military officers in pristine Army service uniforms entered the hall. Leading them was 3-star Lieutenant General Marcus Vance, the Deputy Chief of Staff for Army Logistics, flanked by armed federal special agents wearing suits with gold Pentagon lapel pins. The room gasped. Elite business executives stood up from their chairs, whispering in shock. Richard's eyes went wide with sheer excitement. He straightened his silk bow tie, puffed out his chest, and turned to Cynthia with an ecstatic grin. "Look at that!" Richard whispered loudly. "They didn't just call me. They sent a 3-star general in person to sign the contract. The Pentagon is delivering my $5 billion deal right to my feet." Richard pushed past the waitstaff, stepping directly into the center aisle, holding his arms out with a grand, theatrical smile. "General Vance," Richard announced proudly, bowing slightly. "Welcome to the Bellevue Gala. I am Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Cybertech. I assume you are here to deliver the final authorization for Project Aegis Vanguard?" General Vance stopped 3 feet in front of Richard. His face was like carved granite, cold, unreadable, and stern. General Vance didn't even extend his hand. "Mr. Sterling," General Vance said, his voice deep and cutting through the silent room like a blade, "I am not here to deliver an award." Richard blinked, his arrogant smile wavering slightly. I beg your pardon, General? My lobbyists assured me." "Your lobbyists are under federal investigation, Mr. Sterling," General Vance interrupted coldly. "And Sterling Cybertech has been officially, permanently disqualified from defense procurement under Executive Order 14B. A violent, collective shockwave ran through the 200 guests. Cynthia's wineglass slipped from her hand, shattering against the marble floor. Disqualified?" Richard stammered, his face draining of all color. "That's impossible! Who could possibly disqualify my firm? Who has the authority to overturn my application?" General Vance didn't answer Richard. Instead, his sharp eyes moved past Richard's trembling body, scanning the room until they locked directly onto me at the corner table. General Vance snapped his boots together with a sharp, echoing crack. The 3 officers behind him instantly came to rigid attention. In front of 200 stunned corporate executives, politicians, and high society elites, the 3-star general raised his right hand and rendered a crisp, unwavering military salute directly to me. "Mr. Director," General Vance declared loudly, his voice echoing off the high ceilings, "the Defense Intelligence Agency has completed the preliminary audit on Sterling Cybertech as you ordered. We require your final signature on the enforcement warrants." Silence, total, suffocating silence, fell over the entire ballroom. Richard slowly turned his head around, his eyes wide with absolute horror, looking at me as if he had just seen a ghost. Mr. Director?" Richard gasped, his voice cracking violently. "Arthur, what is he talking about?" I calmly stood up from my chair. I adjusted the cuffs of my simple, unbranded suit jacket. I picked up my leather briefcase, walked past the frozen guests, and stopped directly beside General Vance. I returned the general's salute with a calm, precise nod. "Thank you, General Vance. I have the encrypted tablet right here." General Vance turned his cold glare toward Richard, who was now trembling so violently he could barely stand. "You don't know who this man is, do you, Mr. Sterling?" General Vance said, his voice dripping with absolute disdain. "This is Director Arthur Pendelton. He is the Chief Executive Director of Strategic Defense Procurement. He holds Tier 5 security clearance, reports directly to the Secretary of Defense, and answers only to the Armed Services Committee." General Vance stepped closer to Richard, leaning in with terrifying military authority. "This low-level paper pusher, you've spent 20 years mocking, is the sole authority who oversees every single defense contract in this nation. He reviewed your software, discovered your fraudulent overseas outsourcing, and personally signed the order to shut your company down." The fall of the arrogant and the final lesson. The humiliation in the room was absolute. Richard collapsed backward onto an unoccupied dining chair, his face entirely ghost white, sweat dripping down his forehead. His $5 billion dream hadn't just vanished. His entire corporate empire was about to be seized by federal investigators. Cynthia rushed to his side, weeping hysterically, clutching Richard's arm as she looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Arthur!" "Please," Cynthia sobbed, her voice trembling uncontrollably. "We're family. You can't do this to us. Talk to the general. Tell him it was a mistake." I stood under the bright crystal lights, looking down at the couple who had treated me like dirt for 2 decades. "There was no mistake, Cynthia," I said calmly, keeping my voice steady and quiet. "For 20 years, you and Richard measured human worth by the price of a car, the brand of a watch, and the size of a bank account. You believed that, because I didn't shout my title from the rooftops, I was weak. I tapped the lock on my leather briefcase. In my world, real power doesn't demand a spotlight. Real authority doesn't need to degrade others to feel tall. My duty is to protect this nation and the service members who put their lives on the line, not to enrich relatives who cut corners for profit. General Vance signaled to the federal special agents. Mr. Sterling, you are required to report to the Federal Procurement Integrity Board in Washington at 0800 hours on Monday. If you fail to appear, federal warrants will be executed. Without another word, General Vance and his escort cleared a path through the stunned crowd. I turned to my wife, Clara, offering her my arm. Clara stood up proudly, her head held high, a beautiful, radiant smile on her face, as she slipped her arm through mine. As we walked down the center aisle of the Bellevue Country Club, the very same 200 executives who had laughed at me minutes ago now stood up in profound, silent respect, parting like the Red Sea as we passed. Within 30 days of that night, Sterling Cybertech collapsed under the weight of federal fraud investigations and massive debt. Richard was forced to sell his multi-million-dollar estate, liquidate his assets, and face years of legal battles. Cynthia's high society friends completely abandoned her. Clara and I returned to our quiet, peaceful life in our modest suburban home. I continued driving my reliable sedan to work every morning at 8 a.m., walking into the Pentagon quietly, carrying out my duty to the country without needing a single word of public applause. True strength has never been proven by loud boasts or high society titles. Arrogance always builds a castle out of sand, screaming for the world to look because. But when the storm arrives, the sand washes away, leaving only those who stood firm in honor, integrity, and silent dignity. Leave the word integrity in the comments right now if you believe that true human worth is measured by character, quiet service, and honor, never by shallow status or loud arrogance. Arrogance always demands an audience, but real authority moves in silence until the work is done. If this story reminded you to never judge a person's power or capability by their quiet cover, hit that subscribe button right now, because tomorrow I am bringing you the unbelievable story of a quiet 45-year-old high school janitor who was publicly mocked at a 20-year reunion, only for a convoy of black SUVs to pull up to hand him the keys to the entire corporate tech empire. I'll see you in the next story.